Now let's try to talk seriously about Turks. This is probably the most interesting topic. There are some processes which make us understand who the Turkic-speaking people are and what the quote, one nation, two states made by Azerbaijan and Turkey means. Is it a political thesis, or are they the same people or not? Talking about Azerbaijan, it seems that everything is clear. Since 1918, our historians have written and shown how this state was created. In accordance with that state, they are already beginning to form a society. They did the same thing. They wrote, "We are both Afghans and Muslims, or Turks. Our language is Turkish." It was done a lot on state level. Haydar Aliyev too organized meetings to clarify what kind of an identity this people have and which are the origins of the Turkic peoples, because they were new people. But who are the Turks living in the territory of the Ottoman Empire? If we look at the historiography, we'll find the roots. We also delivered a number of lectures to understand where the Armenian mythology comes from. This is approximately preserved, and it seems that these people came and captured Byzantine, and they finally became Ottomans. But we got acquainted with many episodes and already knew that it has a little bit of a different history. For the past decades, the origins of the Ottomans in particular and that of the empire in general were studied. Our historians have wonderful books about them. And the Turks also have a lot of books and have their own point of view. I do not say how many there are in the world. That's why, at first, we need to understand the truth. How did they suddenly start talking about the Turkic people, the collapse of the Ottoman Empire? Are they really a people with a 1,000-year-old history? Or are they about the same as the Azerbaijanis? And at least, are the Azerbaijanis and the Ottoman Turks the same people? This is really important for us, as our security depends on those questions. Yes, Turkism is a project. Turkic people were a political project. That political project was founded during the First World War. Why? What is the reason? I followed a lot of concepts, and I was very interested in the Turkish historians' comments. First, why do they need the national project? The new ethnicity was actually created with a new language. The Ottoman language is not a Turkish language. Why did they need this? Of course, for surviving. The country had to be survived during the First World War. If we look at the map, we will see that the European part of the empire disappeared. There was no Egypt. The Arab part remained. I would also like to mention the fact that Egypt had already captured the capital of the Ottoman Empire in the 1830s. But we are not interested in these facts. We are interested in the idea. There was a question, how to save the remaining part of the country. They needed a nationalistic idea around which Islamic Ottomans should be mobilized. Here, there was a very interesting thing. Why not around Islam, but a nationalist idea that was completely absent in the Ottoman Empire? Because of Arabs uprising in Mecca in 1916. Do you understand what happened? When the Islamic peoples, the Arabs, rebelled, it was already clear that it was impossible to continue the state policy towards Islam. The Ottomans have ignored the Turks throughout their history. Some historians have always wondered why such a choice was made to create an ethnicity like this. When they wrote about Turks in the foulest language, it was indeed a shame to say, I'm a Turk in the Ottoman Empire. And those living in the empire were weighed down by the complexes caused by their Turkish identity. They were very much spurned by others and hence antagonized because of this. The Turkish historian Taner Akçam, in his book Turkish Nationalistic Ego and the Armenian Question, written in 1995, tried to find just that, a contempt or hatred to the Turks in the Ottoman Empire, or why they chose to create such ethnic groups to mobilize people, or to eliminate the superpowers' plans after the First World War, and so on and so forth. So a lot of work has been done. But how was it done? Taner Akçam tried to find the answer from the history, bringing some examples. He wrote about Tamerlane's and Bayezid's second history held in 1401. And the Turkish feudal lords had themselves to blame, as they betrayed Bayezid. So that's why that hatred came. Actually, this is not entirely true. In fact, the Ottoman authorities have nothing to do with the Turks. It certainly wasn't studied properly. If it was, it would be pointless, as they needed to find out why Turkish wasn't the state language. No one knew about Turks in schools. Turks got insulted when they called Turks by Europeans. It was a blasphemy. For example, if you want to insult an Armenian, you say, "You're a Turk." It is found in many peoples, and it also studied why and how it came about. How the Islamic people were called Tajik, Tajikistan and the Ottomans Empire. Historians couldn't understand the meaning. It is clear that empire hadn't been conquered, but had been Islamized. The Ottoman self-awareness and identity is very complex. We talked about millets, a religious community. Everything focused on the religion. That's why it was very complex. In fact, there was nihilism. I think it was exaggerated a little bit because other historians wrote that people weren't interested in that topic in the Ottoman Empire. It's like asking Armenians about the Dagestan people. Now, what do you think? How many of them would be interested in this? When your life is not connected to any factor, the subject is not at all interesting. It might interest historians, politicians perhaps. Here, we're about to find out the essence of this project. It is most understandable to read the words of Ataturk, the godfather and implementer of the project. It is not necessary to speak about this Ataturk separately. He said that 600 years the Ottomans took power from us and seized us. Now it is time for us to regain our power. We should go back to our roots for 600 years. These roots won't just come to us. We need to go to find them. We not only have to make history, we have to write the story. to write it correctly. When Ataturk came to power in 1920s, he created theories of language and history, which he planned. Taner said that the new ethnicity was made up of evil, not just this. Before this historiography, the remarks were constantly anti-Ottoman. They took everything from us. We have got to get it back. They're against the Christians. They gathered the poor mass and said to them, "You are Turks, you made, you enslaved us." So you should stand and erase everyone, and everyone who speaks against Turks and Turkism, destroy them. I am completely citing Ataturk. They created a language in 1928, changed the alphabet, taking the European one. But what was the difficulty? On the one hand, they wished to be like Europeans, to become a European country. On the other hand, they made an ethnicity whose roots were in the East. You're the strongest, the only one. That was almost racism. Turkish historians also wrote racial features like, "No people are equal to you, you're the only one." 1,000 years, we saved all the nations, taught them. We're the big empire creators. What will happen to people who are thirsty and starving and one suddenly preaches something like this? It's clear. It was classic fascist ideology. There were some historians who made quotes of Adolf Hitler, a German Nazi party leader. He was a shining star. Ataturk was my teacher. He taught me how to mobilize people and make revolution. Ataturk made the best of two revolutions in Turkey and Mussolini. I learned everything from him. So, over time, the choice of this idea is also relevant. In a few words, I'll tell you what the situation was and what affected this choice, which was very important. Since the 18th century, everyone writes, and the facts show that the Ottoman Empire was falling apart. They had lost Crimea. Since the 19th century, some sort of ripping process began from all places. In the Balkans, revolts began against the empire. Egypt had grown so strong that it had itself become a threat to Constantinople. The Ottoman government decided to implement some reforms. The well-known reforms, called Tanzimat, were adopted in 1839 as some reform organization, some project for becoming a European country, and also for survival. They've changed army system. Muslims have already called for mandatory military service, but not Christians. Remember the well-known fact that for centuries a Christian has had no right to take up arms and ride the horse. They summarized everything for becoming a European country. But it did not help them. All this time, processes have already begun in society which had led to the demise of these countries. Now, what were those processes? Rise of nationalism. In any empire, if nationalist ideas come in, it cracks. And it's interesting to see how much it was an external impact and how much it was an internal process. Because these millets were different nations and started to form parties. Since 1878, after Berlin Congress, every nation started to form parties. Armenians also had parties, Hunchaks and Dashnaks. Islamists also had the famous party named Young Turks. That was the Ottoman Empire. The Committee of Union and Progress Party was based on the Ottoman ideas. That is, the Ottoman Empire, people could become one nation. There was yet another organization which had the same idea. It was called Pan-Islamism, which was an idea of creating a new Ottoman nation. It lasted up to the First World War. The cases I told you. When they saw nothing helped, both the Christians and Arabs started to separate. Things already changed. The same party already proclaimed itself Turkish. The year of 1915 wasn't random. The decision was taken to eliminate all peoples except Islamists. So far, officially, this process had not focused on nation building. It started later on. Ataturk made it after the war. It started when the idea changed from Pan-Islamism to Pan-Turkism. This is important for us to understand. These were the same people who went to Paris. Europeans call them Turks. But they said, don't insult us, we're Ottomans. It was a political process. Since the second half of the 18th century, Turkism and Pan-Turkism have been prevalent. Armin van Bury, a Hungarian professor who was an advisor of the Sultan, and by the way, I have no idea how he came to the post, spread the first idea of Pan-Turkism. And this man wrote quite interestingly that, yes, it turned out that he was a member of the British Secret Service. He said, I was wondering when I told Turks about Turkish idea and who they are. No one listened to me, and nobody was interested in it. So Pan-Turkism, Pan-Islamism, was spread by Britain, and Pan-Arabism too for rising Arabs. If there were plans to undermine the empire, naturally these effects were of great importance. In fact, many people write that if Europeans had not convinced the Ottomans in a single voice for decades, and with their articles, meetings, and assemblies too, it is unlikely that the Ottomans would have taken this step. At first, they could not overcome this age-old hatred in themselves. Then the first Roman Tatars in Russia began to address this topic too. Ismail Gasprinsky published it. He was a publisher. He spread his publications all over Russia, near Volga shorelines, Kazan, as well as within the Ottoman Empire. Then there were a lot of new newspapers in the Ottoman Empire, in which a racist idea was published about Turks. That is, there were Turks and they were the only ones in the world. Everyone started to publish it. It was clear that work was being carried out. And there were studies suggesting this was done at the state level. The Russian special services did this. So on both sides, for decades until 1914, this idea was introduced. There was a common interest here. Why? Many said that the British were doing it to create some kind of an anti-Russian image, to create a new people for the preservation of Black Sea Straits, because Russia made some trials to capture them. Why were the Russians doing this? It was said that Russians spread some nationalistic ideas to make the empire collapse. So everything was true. It is very important for us to understand that a lot of work had been done. In parallel, some Turkish studies had been carried out in various European countries, especially in France. But the result was that they were able to force a society with an anti-Turkish mind to choose a Turk. And when we look at what happened in those years, we have to look at that process. When the first constitution was adopted in the Ottoman Empire, I will tell you a specific episode. In 1876, 2 years later, Sultan Abdulhamid closed it. They would like to create a parliament. He abolished everything. At that time, the struggle began against the anti-Sultan among all peoples of the empire. The new Armenian parties, which also worked with Islamists, participated in the struggle. At that time, the struggle against the Sultan was general. They struggled through their parties. Finally, in 1908, the real government was overthrown by young Turks. But what changed? What happened then? The idea I was talking about, the state policy changed from Ottomanism to Turkism. And the tragedy of Armenians and all Christian peoples had taken place because the decision was this: only Islamists should be remained. Even that time, no one called them Turkish, but already since the 1920s, it was Ataturk who said everybody would be Turkish. He wrote on the shirt, "I am Turkish," then raised the flag. Happy is he who can say, "I'm Turkish." For a long time, in 1928, they created a language theory and passed a law. And then they saw it was difficult for them. They just started speaking about alphabet. They got from European letters and started to use at schools. In 1935, they found that the language was different. It is still surprising why this language consists of Persian and Arabic. Arabic is understandable because it was a religious language. But what about Persian? We should study this further. And why Armenians called Islamists as Tajiks? The history of the Ottoman Empire has different layers. The fact that they said, "We have been robbed of power, land, and language," at least. Ataturk said this. He had declared Ottomans an enemy in order to be able to create an ethnic group on this hostility. And this feud is one of their traits. It is hard to imagine how such an ethnic group could be created with such awareness, with such historical mythology, without hostility. If you're creating something in an empty space, all you have to do is say that I was stolen. That's mine. I think once I've said that until now in Turkey, now also in Artsakh, there's a Turkish flag on every stone, even in the sea, to say, "That's mine." When we look at Azerbaijan today, we see the same thing. Aliyev bragged that I was able to raise a generation that hates Armenians, and we won. Built on hatred, how long can such an ethnicity last? Take Italy. Even Nazi Germany lost having these ideas. When they lost, people got rid of this hatred, these ideas. But you see, The Turks won with that idea at that time. At least this means that it is possible to maintain this Turkish ethnicity only through the basis of hatred. Now we see how it is done in Azerbaijan, and they call each other one nation, two states. In other words, these people of Azerbaijan are being integrated into the Turkish nation on the basis of the Ottomans created then. They come to the idea of hatred. We will have occasion to discuss these questions. This 11th lecture will be the last one. We will move on until autumn and try to continue our discussions in a more political way. Now we have tried to understand phenomena more philosophically to see today. And we have to talk clearly about different topics to understand how it happened that Armenians didn't understand all these things at that time. How did the revolution happen? A new nation was born, and no one sees it and understands it. I'm surprised that I look at the writings and statements of the figures then. No one saw what happened, and of course they didn't know who they were treating. We must talk about it and understand that this genocide was not an accident. If such things happen in a decaying empire, look when you create parties and you don't know what to do, you realize other people's anti-Sultan programs, and you create a constitutional order in the country. And if you don't understand this, you will never be able to have your own plan. And further, we will see how that has affected in our ethnic identity, and will better understand our task today.